Hello, everyone. Hi, Olga. How are you doing? And Punya, welcome to today's session of the Big Apple Film Festival panel. Today, we're going to be talking with Aristotle Torres about how to craft a award-winning screenplay. Aristotle's not only a writer, but he's also a director and a producer, and he knows a lot about the business. So all your questions, we can get to all of them. It's a small group today. And I guess let's get started. Aristotle, if you want to introduce yourself, talk a bit about how you got your start and where you are today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me today, Andy. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here and to share this space and talk about a craft that I dedicated my life to and love so much, which is storytelling and specifically screenwriting. So this is awesome. I'm excited. And yeah, I started my career um, directing, making music videos. Then I transitioned into commercials, and have been fortunate enough to work with some really amazing people like J. Cole, like Mary J. Blige, Nas, The Roots, Ludacris. And then within the commercial space, I've worked with Pepsi, Starbucks, Nike, um, and just done some really cool things. And then around maybe 7 years ago, I decided that I wanted to transition into narrative storytelling. So I made my first short film, um, which was an adaptation of a very iconic Biggie song named "I Got a Story to Tell." And then I made a short called Story Ave, which initially I wanted to make a play. And I was fortunate enough to be reached out to by Sundance, and it played in that festival. And I was invited to their highly prestigious lab program and went through their writing and directors lab. And it was transitioned into a feature film, which premiered in 2023 and won the grand jury prize at South by 2023. Played at a bunch of festivals, got nominated for some awards, and yeah, and now I'm writing my next film, which is really exciting. It's a horror comedy.
Oh, nice. Um, Horror comedies in my space, actually. So
Yeah.
it's nice. But so this just came from an idea, like an original idea you got from a song, and then you came up with a story and did a short. It all kind of stemmed from like a just a seed of an idea, which is kind of what I wanted to talk about, like what makes an idea worth pursuing? Like what about that idea made you think this was a feature, well, a short to find out?
Yeah, so the song the short that was an adaptation of a song was just a short. That was the first narrative piece of storytelling I ever did. It was my way to just kind of practice and lean into the craft. And I was fortunate enough to get some success as a music video director, and that could be a gift and a curse. So making this short was not only a way to experiment in a new form of storytelling, but also kind of let people know that I was ready to venture into narrative storytelling. And yeah, I think for me, as someone who's been a creator for over 15 years, and I like to say my full time job is to just be inspired. A lot of ideas come into my mind, but I think the ones worth pursuing are the ones that stay within your mind, that kind of burn and implement itself within your subconscious, and you kind of always go back to, even if you work on other things. Um, and I think what we do is, you'll never really. I'm a firm believer that you can never really master uh you know screenwriting or directing. Like Kurosawa, who I think is the greatest, said on his deathbed, "I'm still learning." It's one of those crafts that the more you learn, the more you realize you have more to learn. So I say that to say that, like, I think if an idea has burned itself within your brain, if you pursue it and it doesn't meet your expectations, at least you did the work, and you experimented and you tried and you saw it through. And sometimes that's the reward, is just having an idea and seeing it through. Because I think a large part of the process within storytelling is like, first is like, how do you have an idea and then implement that idea on paper? And that within itself is a process and a journey. And then the second part of that is, was that idea good? And that's its own journey and its own process. So, it's all, I like to say it's shooting free throws. It's just something you have to do every day. You have to make it a part of your life. And yeah, ideas come to you, but the ones that burn in your soul that you want to at least play within that world, those are the ones worth pursuing.
Mhm. And then I guess from an idea stage, how do you know like what genre it's, an idea can take a lot of different forms. I mean, it can be like,
Mhm.
this is something that could be played funny. This is something that could be played scary. Like, how do you take that seed of an idea and develop it into like kind of moving out from that original idea into what would be the best way to tell the story?
Sure. Well, usually when I think of an idea that pertains to storytelling, the first thing that comes to mind is my inciting incident, which is, if this moment doesn't happen, there is no movie, because that's essentially your log line. And then from within that, I create a series of questions before I even pursue character development or seven major beats or anything. And not to get too specific, but some of those questions are, why do I want to tell the story? Why am I the person to tell it? Why does this story need to be told now? But the most important, and the question that's most relevant to your question is how do I want the audience to feel at the end? Um, and I think this is really important work to do for multiple reasons. I think it's either going to tell you in your gut, this is worth doing the work, or it's going to tell you, you know what, I don't really know if I love this the way I felt when I first thought about it. And even if you do pursue it in some sort of form, you're going to be asked these questions when you meet with producers, when you meet with actors, when you meet with financiers. This is the information they're looking for beyond the actual creative. So, when I think of how do I want the audience to feel at the end, that will really determine my tone for the film. And at least for me, I'm an artist who, no matter what medium I'm playing in, whether it's still or moving image, you know, I like to believe the art is the conversation after, more so than the actual movie. So I'm thinking about, okay, what are the conversations that I want after? What do I want to leave open ended? And it's usually through that process of thought and articulating within my brain that I can determine the tone, I can determine the genre, and then that'll lead me down the path of whether it's horror, whether it's comedy, whether it's suspense. Yeah,
And then having somebody, a point of view to tell your story, you're going to need to come up with your main character who's going to, be the one we're going to follow throughout.
sure.
Can you talk a little bit about that process of finding the perfect person to tell your story, um, coming up with characters?
Yeah, yeah. So, the first thing I'm going to do, and this will kind of be a fairly straightforward inception from the log line, that inciting incident, my protagonist and my antagonist. So I'm going to work on them first, and I'm going to do the most work on them. And it's like, I want to know their internal conflict, their external conflict, their internal goal, their external goal. What are their secrets? Um, you know, uh, what is what are their characterizations? What are their personalities like? And not that I want to put myself in a box to be limited to those things, because as I'm writing the story, I'm going to learn more about my characters. But I at least want to do, like, I'm a writer that I want to minimize options before I get to pages.
Mhm.
Because I think pages is the most daunting. It's the hardest part of the process. You're looking at a blank page, and if you have no clear direction, the character could say anything. But if you understand their wants, their secrets, their desires, and you pick certain personality traits, you're minimizing those options. And then the more you do that work, then it gets to a place where the character is only going to say two or three things. Now, how do I build subtext? How do I say that to the person in the scene without them directly saying it? And then that's the rewriting work. So, I'll usually start with my protagonist, my antagonist, and then I'll develop supporting characters, which then their subplots will materialize. But what's great about it is, all of my supporting characters, their subplots have to push along the story of my protagonist. So
Mhm.
they're all working within the goals of the work that I did to start the process. So for instance, in a buddy comedy, like right now, what I'm writing is about two best friends. And I know that even though the buddy is different than the protagonist, the buddy is essentially a mirror of the protagonist. And at the beginning, they're going to start and they're going to be best friends and they're going to push each other. And then at a certain point, they're going to fight and we're going to have hero's darkest hour and they're going to be the opposites. And then they're going to come back together again. And these are kind of, not necessarily cliches, but benchmarks to hit within your screenplay. So you have at least a goalpost when you're writing and you're looking at that blank page in front of you. Yeah.
So you outline pretty well, pretty intensely to set those places where these events are going to happen. I know a lot of people, writers I talk to, don't really like the outline. They kind of, but I mean, I'm a big proponent of outlining because, like you say, you can't really keep everything. It's like wrangling cats at some point where your characters are just kind of going out doing without having that structure. Um, to put that
Yeah, I
together.
think I think it's a balance. Like for instance, the script that I'm writing now, I did a lot of backstory work on my four principal characters. I did a lot of research on motivation and just different cultural elements that were within the story. But like I said, I'm not doing those things to limit myself. I'm still going to get to the page,
Mm.
and the characters are going to speak for themselves. And the story is going to develop, and I'm going to discover things with the character. I think it's just about creating, specifically when it pertains to the arc of the story, I have to know at least my seven major moments within the story before I get to pages, which is my inciting incident, my stunning surprise, which ends my first act and propels my protagonist within the adventure, my midpoint sequence, which will feel visually different than the rest of the film. It allows me to break perspective of the protagonist. It allows me to delve within a subplot that is not with the protagonist. I'll have my act two climax, which is that's when the protagonist is going to overcome their internal conflict to face their external goal. I'll have my stunning surprise two, which ends my second act. I'll have my obligatory scene, which is essentially the hero versus the villain in whatever form that is, and then I have my denouement, which is like the wrap up of the story.
Mm.
So I at least want to know those things so I know what I'm working towards within those benchmarks. And like I said, I'm just kind of, even if I'm just kind of improving the dialogue and improving what's happening and building off the story, I know what I'm working towards.
Okay, so let's start like in the beginning of a script. Like how soon, like, I mean, you're directing your own, but if you're writing a script and you're
Mhm.
trying to get it sold, like how
Mhm.
soon do you have to have something make the reader want to read on? I mean, how generally do you know how long the readers usually read? I mean, some of them read 10 pages before some 20. Is there something that you have a tip to like do something early in the script that totally gets their attention and wows them so they want to read on?
Yeah, I mean, so I think that's like a two part. So I think overall, and this is why the backstory and the development work is so important, is because you want to create a page turner. You want to create something that you have to turn the page. You have to know what's happening next. And there are little tips and secrets to do that. So, every scene needs intention and obstacle. The protagonist has to want something in the scene, and there has to be something stopping him from getting it. So that's number one. The second is there needs to be new news. The protagonist needs to be learning something because we're trying to keep, like, let's forget the watcher, let's only focus on the reader. We want to keep the reader engaged. And the way you do that is you keep asking questions, you keep building on the story. So they have to know what's happening next. And by the time they realize what's going on, they're already in the second act. Great, you've hooked them in. So that's the second thing. At least the third thing for me that I like to practice is therefore but. So the character does something, therefore this happens, but then this happens, so therefore this happens. But then this happens, so therefore this happens. And at least for me, if I create that trifecta of three things, and all those three things are working within a ballet, within the scene and within the sequence, I've created something that, Paul Thomas Anderson said something that really resonates with me is like, if your reader or your viewer is 5 minutes ahead of you, you have to work 15 minutes to get them back. And our job as storytellers is to keep the viewer exactly where we want them, to keep the reader exactly where we want them. Yeah, we could subvert expectation and misdirect them and think that that thing is going to happen, and that's good writing. But then there needs to be a payoff, and there needs to be something else that happens. And if you continuously do that, you keep them engaged and they want to keep going. So that's like the broad full script thing. I think in terms of like the first 10 pages, one is you want your opening image, which is essentially going to establish the tone of the film. That has to be something that really hooks us in. It has to be something that you need to put a lot of craft and a lot of care in. I mean, let's think about some iconic movies. Inglourious Bastards. The opening scene of that movie is probably the greatest Tarantino written scene ever. And it's because it's doing a multitude of things at the same time. It's asking the audience a bevy of questions. It's building the world and establishing the tone. But most importantly, it's showing you the power of the antagonist. So now we understand the stakes. This is a life or death mission that we're about to go on. And if the protagonist slips up, he will die. Right? Let's think about Scream, which does a really good job of subverting expectations because Drew Barrymore is the biggest star in the movie, and she's all over the marketing, and she's in the trailer. So you go into that movie, you watch the opening image of the movie, and then that character dies. Now you're like, oh, wait, what did I just sign up for? So these are just little tricks that, within the first 10 pages, you have to really do these things. And I think, especially when it pertains to making, if you want to make something that appeals to a broader audience, that appeals to getting, multitude of financiers, getting a studio involved, any of those bigger aspirations that we all strive for, the sooner the inciting incident happens, the better. And like I said, the inciting incident is if this moment doesn't happen, there is no movie. So I like to use, when I do these things, I like to use the example of E.T. Because if you ask someone, what's the inciting incident of E.T., majority of people go, oh, when E.T. lands on Earth. But no, E.T. could have met another little boy, and there could have been another story. The inciting incident of that story is E.T. meeting Elliot. That's the movie we've signed up for. And, I think, like I said, I think, breaking rules is fun, but at least talking about the rules and talking about appealing to a broader audience, you want that moment to happen within 2 to 7 pages.
Okay. And that's where we get, we learn what the story is going to be about and
Sure.
we want to probably, let the audience know what the goal is going to be and, set up possible
Totally.
so they understand.
Totally.
So you kind of talked about, having the viewer 5 minutes ahead. That kind of interests me. So like what would be an example of something that would be written that would make a viewer go 5 minutes in advance? Is that just like spoon feeding them something and they're just waiting for that? Yeah, could you explain a little bit more about that? I'm a little unclear about something like that.
Yeah. So even in my debut feature film, Story Ave, which is out now on Hulu and Stars and Apple TV, there's a moment where the hook, the call to action is my protagonist, who's a 17-year-old kid, wants to join a graffiti gang, and he robs an old man on a train platform. The old man subverts expectations and invites this young man to have a meal with him in order to figure out why he's robbing people. This happens at about 18 minutes in the film, so we're still within the first act. In that first meeting, I convince the audience that there's a meet cute and the protagonist is meeting the waitress within this restaurant. And the way I block it and the way I shoot it, the audience is going, oh, they're going to get together by the end of the movie. But that's not necessarily the payoff. So that's just like a personal example of subverting expectations. And if you are going to keep the audience 5 minutes in front of them, you have to misdirect them later. In a more broader perspective, Parasite is a great example. Early on in Parasite, when the family's eating dinner and they're in their basement apartment, they see a man kind of sludging down the street who could easily be a vampire. And that's what director Bong is doing. He's telling you this is a zombie movie, rather. Sorry, not vampire. This is a zombie movie. And then 10 minutes after that, this is not a zombie movie. So he subverts our expectations on purpose because he's making a genre film on a large scale. And he's preparing the audience subconsciously and consciously that this journey that you're about to go on, you know nothing about. I'm about to mess with your head the whole movie. Mm-hmm. And he says it to you. What makes the movie and what makes him special is he does it in such a nuanced way with subtext that it doesn't feel obvious to the audience. And us as writers, that's the work within our writing, is we have to deliver our points of storytelling, and the more craft we do it and the better we get at writers, the less obvious it is to the audience.
Okay. And anybody in the audience, if you're interested in asking a question, you can either just raise your hand, use a raise hand emoji, or let me know if you want to ask a question in the chat box, and I'll ask it for you. I wanted to talk a little bit more about your character arc and how it pertains to the plot arc, and how you can keep writing scenes that do both. If it's, that's one of the ways you keep a reader or a watcher involved, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it all comes down to, like I said, really knowing your protagonist and understanding their goals internally and externally, understanding their conflicts internally, externally, understanding their secrets. And for me, I'm the kind of writer who is very sensitive about perspective. I'm picking a character, and it's this character's story. So even if we're watching something play out within a scene, that might not necessarily be reality. That's just the way the protagonist perceives reality. And I think it's in those tools that you're able to, add your own voice and your own originality. So, plot is all determined by characters' wants and desires. And like I said before, like, it's intention and obstacle, show, don't tell. The more the character wants something, the more we need things emotionally or physically to stop that protagonist from achieving it. And it's within that journey of desire that we develop our plot.
Okay. And then let's talk a little about dialogue and versus, show, don't tell, but there's a lot of interesting ways of making dialogue, more appealing, and how a second part to that question is, how do you make your characters sound different from each other, which I find is
great question. So I'll answer the second part first. So an exercise that I like to do when I at least have a draft is, I like to block out. I'll print it out and I'll block out all the names of my characters. And if I could read that draft and know who everyone is just based on the way they speak, then I know I'm in a good place. But if I read through that draft and I'm like, I don't know who this character is, this character sounds like that character, then I know that I haven't done enough character work. Too many characters have the same desires, they have the same tones, they have the same goals. So that's at least a good exercise for me that will either enforce what I've written or let me know that I have some more backstory work to do. I need to understand desires and secrets a little bit more. In overall terms of dialogue, subtext is is our gold. It's our secret weapon. You know, so for me, I like to say first, before I even get to dialogue, can I say this with a reaction or can I say this with music? So that's number one. If I can do either of those things, then dialogue is not necessary because I never want the audience to feel like I'm just dumping exposition on them. And even if I am dumping exposition on them, I want to do it in a way where it's done with care and with craft. Um, and then, like I said, you know, if you do that backstory work and you understand conflicts and goals and secrets and desires, then you can craft your dialogue within subtext. So, you know, it's like if you and I were having a coffee and, um, you know, and we're talking about something and there's something I want from you, and we're not in a movie, we're just talking. The way humans normally talk is like we don't just come and go, "Hey, Andy, I want this thing from you." It's like, no, we're gonna have a dialogue. We're gonna have that dance of discourse of dialogue. You know, so you know, I think a big part of crafting dialogue is living life. You know, go to a coffee shop, just listen to how people talk. Watch a movie and black out your screen and just listen to the pace of the dialogue and and how characters say what they want to say. I, you know, um, yeah, you know, that's really what it is. Is like people rarely just say their secrets or their desires up front. It's usually hidden in something. And the more you can do that, and the more the audience is discovering their desires within the character's wants and intention and obstacle, the more you're keeping them hooked, and nothing ever feels obvious or spoon fed.
Mhm. And then, oh, what was I going to say? You talked a little bit about music,
Hmm.
create some of that. How is that done in a written script if you're not directing? Like I know they tell you don't use songs, don't name songs when you're writing scripts because you're not going to get the rights, and it just makes people think of budget. Um, but you kind of mentioned to get thoughts across using music a little bit. Is there a way to do that without citing songs, or is that just something you know as a director that you want to do?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think there's two parts. There's you know, there's music and then there's score. You know, so score usually will, you know, like specifically within horror. Horror's whole backbone is stretching the rubber band, is anticipation.
Mhm.
It's rarely ever about the scary thing. It's about everything leading up to the scary thing. Because as humans, that's what we naturally and organically gravitate to. It's like if you're afraid to go into the basement, the confidence to, you know, going down the stairs is the more scarier part than being at the bottom of the stairs. So you know, score is going to do a lot of your work. So as a writer, I mean, I'm a unique example because I'm also a writer, a director, so I can't speak from the perspective of just being a writer, but at least I know as a director that okay, this is going to be a this is a scene that's going to be really reliant on score to build the anticipation of what I'm trying to say to the viewer or to the reader. Um, and I don't know, I'm the kind of person that when I write, I like to think of the opening song you hear when you play the movie. I think, like I said, I think the opening image is so important visually as a viewer, but even more so as a writer to hook me in. I think that picking a song that the audience knows that establishes tone and is saying something to the reader within subtext can do a lot of heavy lifting.
Mhm.
So that's just a practice of mine.
And then do you recommend like writing with budget in mind, especially for like young writers or beginning writers, you know, who haven't had anything produced yet? Is it important to not write a $500 million film?
Yeah, that's crucial. I mean, I would say as someone who, and I'm not saying this with ego, I'm more saying this to manage expectations. I was an award-winning commercial and music video director. I got into the most prestigious screenwriting and directors lab in the entire world. I had a massive actor attached to my movie, like an iconic actor. I had a massive production company attached. I have a powerful agent and a powerful manager, and financing was the hardest part. I got 107 no's before I got one yes, and that was with all those things. So, getting your movie financed is a really tricky thing. In terms of thinking about budget as you're writing, I think there's two practices. I think, you don't want to, I would say you definitely don't want to write, a Batman movie if you've never made a movie. That's just, that could be a fun exercise. But the probability of that getting optioned and made is not in your favor. But if you have a chase scene, if you have a car chase, if you have some stunt work, if you have, all these things are time and are money. And I think the way to think about it is, what do I want to say to the audience and what's important? So you have to understand that you're only going to get a certain amount of days. You're only going to get a certain amount of time. So if I have a car chase scene, that's going to take a day. Is that really what I want to spend a day on if I'm shooting my movie in 20 days? And you might say to yourself, yes, that's really important. We have to have that scene. And then I say, explore it. But know in the back of your mind, there is a probability that this is going to have to get cut. So now think about the core of the intention. All right, what's the core? What am I really saying with this? Okay, if this is what I'm really saying with this and I can't do it, what's another way that I can say it that's more realistic for my budget? So I think that's one route to go. But then I also think of like Barry Jenkins with his first film called Medicine for Melancholy. He wrote a script that was a multi-million-dollar script, but could only raise $70,000. So he readjusted his script for a $70,000 movie. And it's two people walking through San Francisco. You know, that's a responsible way to work, because if you create a movie, if you write a movie and then hire crew that's going to be away from their kids and away from their family and not pursuing their dreams, and they're going to have to be on set and they're going to be there for 16, 18 hours a day, create something that's realistic to achieve, and I think you do that by working within the parameters that are set. So, I don't think there's any one specific way to go into it. I would definitely say, if you've never made a film, don't write a $500 million movie. But, if you're in like that 2 to 5 million range, which, it might get you 30 days instead of 15 or 25 days, it might get you, you're not averaging 9 pages a day. Now you're averaging 5 pages a day. You're going to get one scene that is a dream sequence. So you want to just kind of manage your own expectations, because these, like you said, these are the things that people are considering as they're reading your script. And the unfortunate reality of this industry is it rarely has to do with your talent or how good the script is. It has to do with what's the current slate of that production company or those financiers. Does this fit within that slate? And not to sound pessimistic, but the reality is that so many people are trying to achieve this dream. Most of these readers are looking for a reason to not make your movie. Mm-hmm. It's just the reality of it. So what we're doing on our end before we get there is we're doing everything in our power to make this make sense for them. And those are just little tricks that you can do of not having a 4-page shootout, if you can only get 300 grand to make your film.
Okay, well, that's a good segue into, talking about shooting a short, like proof of concept, as like a part of how you can get people interested in your film. So I wanted to talk a little bit about your thoughts of doing a short, since you've you've gone that route, and how you were able to turn that into the feature, which means the short was amazing, pretty much.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but thank you for that compliment. Yeah, I mean, now that I'm on the other end of making my first feature and it being quote unquote successful, it's like getting me on the list, which is the goal, right? Like you don't want to win an Oscar, you want to get on the list. You want to meet studio executives. You want to be in their mind. So I think what a short film really did for me is it let people like Sundance, it let people like my financiers and my producers, it let them know that I had a voice and I had a vision. And if I had more time and more resources, I could build upon this thing that's interesting to you. Um, so, you know, like for instance, like Sundance, they get 18,000 applicants for their feature film program. Only 12 get in initially, and then that goes down to 8. Now that I'm on the other end of it, they told me specifically having a proof of concept short film of my feature gave me a massive leg up because it did a multitude of things. It told them that I had a vision, it told them I had a voice, it visually explained my tone that I wanted the film to be. But more importantly, it tells people that you're willing to take a bet on yourself. You're willing to invest your time, your money, your resources, and you're willing to be a scrappy filmmaker, and you can make something good and make something compelling in a little bit amount of time and a little bit amount of money. And it's all risk assessment. Even when you get financiers, it says at least 3 times in the contract you will not make your money back. So it's like essentially people have to give you money with no expectation of ever getting it back. So I'm at least letting them know, like, I'm gonna protect your investment. I'm gonna make something worthwhile for us to create together. And taking that initiative shows them that through effort and through time and having a finished product. I also think that having a short film proof of concept, if you can get it in the festivals, um, it just helps you get momentum. And I tell people all the time, like, oh, how did you get your agent? How did you get your manager? How did you get your producer? How did you get the actors? Like, none of those things represent talent, they represent momentum. And momentum is vital and it's important. People want to, a famous Chris Rock quote that I love, especially when it pertains to this, is like, if your car breaks down at the side of the road and you just are waving at people asking for help, as people will just drive by. But if you're trying to push the car by yourself, people will pull over and help. And that to me is what a short film says to people, is like, I'm pushing the car already. I just need some other people to help me.
And is there a difference between the short film and a proof of concept, as in like can a proof of concept just be a scene, or does it have to have a beginning, middle, and end, or does it at least have to, or is that what a short film does? Because that's kind of unclear to me, the difference, like how you end a proof of concept as opposed to how you end a short film.
Well, yeah, so I think it's preference, but for me, I'm a huge advocate of short films. Like, I've never made a proof of concept. I've just made short films that are proof of concepts for the bigger idea that I've had. But I'm a huge advocate of short films should be open-ended. Because, right, we have to always get back to the core of, like, what's the goal? The goal is, I want you to watch this short film and go, I need to know what happens next.
Yeah.
So I like, when I make a short film, I want a beginning, middle, and end. I want the viewer to feel satisfied. I want the potential financier, producer, or actor to know, without me having to over articulate it, that I know how to tell a story. The magic within that is knowing how to tell that story, but wanting that person to want more story. So to me, that's a short film. I think when it pertains to proof of concept, even though I've never made one, is something that's standalone.
Mhm.
It's not necessarily a beginning, middle, and end. It's a scene. I would say more so what it's doing is it's establishing tone and pacing within your editorial approach. It doesn't necessarily need a beginning, middle, or end. It needs to just establish those things. In contrast to a short, which should have a beginning, middle, and end. And my personal preference is that ending should be open ended. So we didn't just spend all that time and money to just make something cool. We spent all that time and money to make people more interested in seeing more of that story.
Okay. And then Luis has a question. Can you share a major lesson you learned while making your first feature that you're making sure to keep in mind while writing and directing your second feature and beyond? Also, would love to hear anything you wish you knew before making Story Avenue.
Yeah, great question. I think in terms of what I learned, there's two parts to that. There's like a physical and an emotional. I think the physical is time. Time and perspective is invaluable. Um, Time in the sense of pre-production with your department heads and making sure you're surrounding yourself with people that we're all making the same movie is vital. Um, and making sure that you're hiring people that are going to challenge you in a healthy, productive way and not just tell you all your ideas are great. And that leads me to my second part, which is perspective. What's guaranteed to happen when you make your first feature film, and even though I've never made more than one, I based on my mentors who are all filmmakers that we know and love, is you're gonna lose your way. You know, you're on very little sleep, you're being asked 1,000 questions a day. You're thinking about the smallest details of the frame, of crafting the performance, and perspective is really hard to maintain. Um, so I just know now going into anything I create further, time is where I want to allocate a big part of my resources within pre-production, within principal photography, within editorial. Like for my first film, I had, we had a really small budget. We made our movie for under $1 million. We had less than 2 weeks of pre-pro. We had 20 days of filming. I shot 9 pages a day, and I had 8 weeks to edit. And to give you an example of what that process was like, I exported the final version of my movie on Thursday, and it premiered at South by Southwest on Saturday. We had to fly someone to Austin with a DCP. So I never really had perspective. I never had 2 weeks, a month to just step away from the edit because I'm watching it twice a day in order to make the deadline. So I never had that luxury of stepping away from it, kind of clearing my head, working on something else, going on vacation, not thinking about the movie to come back to it with fresh eyes. So that's just something that I know that I need to really fight for in a positive way with the team that I work on my next film. And then I think on a more grounded level, is knowing that nuance and subtext is such a goal, and that and the rainbow of that is we have to trust our audience. We have to trust our audience that they understand the thing that we're trying to say, and once you say it once, you don't need to say it again. So that would be my like on the ground advice is always trust your audience and always know that your audience is smarter than you think they are.
Okay, I hope that answers your question, Luis. If you have any more, you can type it or you can unmute yourself and ask. In writing a screenplay, like when do you send it out for coverage? Do you get feedback? When do you know, like how many variations do you go through before where you get other eyes on it to make sure that it's ready?
Yeah. What's great about writing is rewriting. And as a writer director, you essentially make 3 movies. You make the one you write, the one you shoot, and the one you edit. So you're going to be rewriting until the very day you export your film. But at least for me, my process is I build a creative tribe of people that I trust, and that can range from 3 to 5, that can range to 10. And this is going to be my trust that I'm listening to their feedback. Because when you just get feedback from anyone that's in your life, it could make you confused. And I think a big advantage to storytelling and screenwriting is, even though you want the masses to like it, that can't be your objective. You need to be telling a story to a specific audience, and you hope that other audiences appreciate it. But when you try to appease and please too many people, then you're not saying anything. You're just kind of spreading the butter. So for me, within my process, like right now, as I'm writing my new feature, like, when I got to the midpoint sequence, I sent it to 3 people, and I'm very specific about the information I'm looking for, which is like, do you understand the motivation? Are you understanding my setup? Are you looking forward to the payoffs? Because it's a comedy, are you having fun reading it? And then give me any other thoughts you have. But I'm really looking for those things, because that's what I need to know in order to finish it. And then, like, once I get a draft done, I'll send it back to them, because now they'll see the payoffs, get their feedback, and if it's in a good place, then I set up a table read. Because I think, like I said, perspective. So I want to sit in a room with 5 actors, 5 writers, maybe 2 or 3 people that don't make movies at all. And I want to sit and I just want to listen. I'm not reading stage direction. I'm not directing. I'm just there to listen to the pacing of the dialogue, to listen to the pacing of the scene, to the cadence, the symphony of the story. Is this all flowing? Oh, you know what? That character wouldn't say that right there. That's a little too on the nose. I need to build more subtext into that. Oh, you know what? That character doesn't need to say that. I think I could say that with music. And then once I'm in a good place after that, and then I create, Michael Arndt is one of my mentors, and this is on his website, so please go check it out. His first film was Little Miss Sunshine, and is the head story creator at Disney. And he gave me a really great feedback questionnaire, which is like, okay, the protagonist, how much do you like this character, 1 to 10? Are you finding the script fun? So then I'll take that script after the table read, that questionnaire, and I'll send it to 5 or 7 people. And once you're never going to please everyone. Everyone's going to always be critical, especially in that process, because people think being critical is productive and like their opinion matters. But once I at least get to a place where the thing that I'm trying to say is being said and it's in a solid place, then I'll send it to my representatives. Because like I said, these agents and these managers, I'm very fortunate enough to be at WME, and I have this really great agent, but I'm at the bottom of the totem pole, and his time is valuable, and first impressions are everything. And then it's like, once they believe in it, okay, great, now let's send it out.
Yeah, I saw Michael Arndt down in Austin talking about that exact topic, about sending scripts out. And he has like a whole questionnaire he sends with the script to
Yeah.
he's amazing. I mean, his whole, he has all these different videos on endings and beginnings, and it's Michael Arndt, I think it's NDT.
And NDT, yeah, that's the questionnaire that I use.
And then another question, one more. You mentioned Medicine for Melancholy. Would love to hear your thoughts surrounding the first time this features director making a micro budget feature. Would it be as helpful nowadays as it was back then?
Yeah, I think so. I think, like I said, I think what you're saying to the industry is, I can make something good with minimal resources. And if you gave me more resources, I would make something even better. So it's like, now when I meet with studios coming off of my first feature, and I tell them I made my movie for less than $1 million, they're like, oh my God, well, that's impressive. Like, I wonder what you could do with 10. I wonder what you could do with 20. And even though that might not be the end result of that meeting, that's at least the seed I've planted. And that's the objective. Because like I said, you want to be on the list, you want to be on their mind. So yeah, what Barry Jenkins told the industry was, with $70,000, I can create an emotional story. I can use those creative limitations to foster creativity, which is essentially the heart of storytelling, because it'll never be perfect. You'll never have enough time. You'll never have enough money. And every day you'll be thrown curveballs. And you're telling them that I'm adaptive and I'm creative and I can do a lot with a little. So I would absolutely recommend making a micro feature if you have the resources to do so.
And then I wanted to ask how you maintain your positive attitude and your motivation to keep going long term during the ups and downs of this career. Um, are there any secrets to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still I'm still navigating that myself, but at least I've I think it's about having healthy habits. I think it's about shedding ego, and I don't mean ego in like a narcissistic way. I mean ego in terms of expectation. I think the more you minimize your expectations, the more you're able to live in the moment and see things as they really are. Um, but not to get too specific, but at least for me, what's really helped me navigate this space is gardening. And I use that analogy, by this is like when I plant a seed in my garden, I don't wake up the next morning and expect to harvest fruit. That's not realistic. But I know that my soil is really good. And I know that I water it every day. And I know that I give it nutrients every 2 weeks. So I know I'm going to get fruit in 3 months. I know that because I'm doing the things every day to get me fruit. And I think that's what writing is and what directing is and what trying to break into Hollywood is, which is being consistent, managing expectations, developing healthy habits, and know that every day you're just chipping away at it. And no work in what we're doing is in vain. Every time you watch a movie, every time you read a script while watching a movie, which is a practice I highly recommend, especially for movies that you've seen multiple times, to just see how the writer is conveying that intention on the page and then how it was executed on the screen. If it's writing my feature, if it's writing a pilot on spec, if it's, reading other people's scripts, these are all tools of me watering my plant and adding nutrients to my plant. And, you know, I'm gonna get fruit eventually. It's the natural part of the process. But I never wake up next morning expecting a drastic evolution than it was the day before. And I think it's just a really good principle to add to what we do in order to keep us balanced, because unfortunately, this industry, especially when you're telling authentic stories that are specific to a culture or an environment or a circumstance, this industry is established to make us question ourselves, and it's built on rejection. It's just the nature of the beast. Um, so those are just at least some things that I've implemented in my life that at least keep me a little bit more balanced and even keeled and help me manage my own expectation.
It's great. This sounds like a good place to wrap up. If there was anything that I didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about before we end this, this will be the time to go with that. If not, thank you, everyone. Thanks for your questions, and thank you, Aristotle.
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, I think, I hope, thank you for everybody for taking your time to chat with Andy and I. I hope that you were able to at least take something from this experience. And, I wish you all the best on your journey, to achieve the impossible, but it is possible through hard work and consistency and dedication. And yeah, if you have time, please check out my debut feature film called Story Ave, starring Luis Guzman and Asante Black. Like I said, it's on Hulu, it's on Stars, it's on Apple TV, it's on Amazon Prime, and And yeah, thank y'all so much for spending time with us today.
Yeah, thank you. It's been very informative, a great conversation, and we'll see you later.
All right, peace.